Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be discussing the main questions from PMQs as Starmer was trying to press Rishi Sunak on the latest news that the government are releasing more prisoners early. In fact, not only that, they're telling the courts to slow down with trials as well, with fewer potential criminals on remand. But of course, ahead of the questions, attention was on whether there would be another defection. There was not, but MPs were certainly having fun with it. Mikey Smith of the Mirror suggested that Labour MPs should have fun by going, ooh, whenever Tory MPs came into the chamber, and then every time they sat on the government side. And they obviously took his advice because that's what they were doing. They did it for each Tory MP who came into the chamber just as Sunak was waiting outside. Even the Speaker joined in because they were doing it as Simon Hart, the Conservative Chief Whip, came into the chamber, and Hoyle said, I don't think the Chief Whip is. Would certainly be top banter if the Chief Whip defected. And I'm told the seat behind Starmer was also left vacant. I couldn't see that clearly myself from the television footage, but if true, that would be an obvious mind screw as well. And I did say that if there was another defection, I would personally leave it another week, make them sweat this week, then spring the next one next week, just before the recess or just after the recess, whatever. And it looks like Labour are fully in alignment with that one. I don't know if there is another defection. There may not be, but they certainly wanted to milk the possibility. Even some Tories were having fun, to be fair. Someone pointed out that Caroline Noakes was wearing red today, and she's one of the ones who got her eye on, the colour of the Labour Party, and she just responded with like laughing emojis. So she was taking it in a stride as well. Probably everyone thinks it's a good laugh, except for the Tory leadership. But there was no defection, so Sunak could breathe a sigh of relief. Until, of course, the questions. It's just possible he now wishes there was a defection. Because not for the first time in recent weeks, Starmer wanted to ask about prisoners being released early. The latest from the Ministry of Justice is that more prisoners are going to be released early due to prison capacity being full, but also that the courts should carry out fewer trials because they need to slow down the old convictions. We ain't got room in the prisons. And the worst of it is that defendants, some of whom will be guilty and some of whom will be innocent, do not know whether they'll be having their cases heard until later in the day. So they've got to prepare as if they've got a trial that day, but they won't find out until the day whether it is or it is not going ahead, nor will their counsels. Those considered to be less serious apparently going to be released on police bail, and they prioritise the more serious cases, we are told. But this is really awkward for the so-called party of law and order. The party of lock the beggars up and worry about whether they're innocent later. Can't even lock up the ones we're fairly sure are guilty now. But in building up to this, Starmer began by pointing out how ridiculous Sunak's government is. He said on the day Sunak was promising to protect Britain, this is Monday, Esther McVey launched a crackdown on that gravest of threats, colourful lanyards. He then asked if the delayed court hearings are going to make people more safe. Sunak, of course, had no answer, so he whined about impartiality and said, oh, some people in Labour don't like Trident. All right, good one. So Starmer tried again a bit more explicitly. He noted that Sunak was giving no information on the prisoners being released early. How many will there be? What crimes will they have committed? Will they be high risk? Now, Sunak then said prisoners won't be released early if at risk, although this is a nonsense, isn't it? Because if they're not at risk, then their release isn't really early, is it? These prisoners are being released early, not because they've satisfied a parole board they no longer pose a threat, but because the prisons are full. So Starmer went in again and he said, look, really clearly, are any being let out early at high risk? Again, Sunak said, nobody will be part of this scheme if they are considered a risk to the public. So that sounds nice and clear, doesn't it? Really clear. And Starmer was there. You could sort of think, if he was a different sort of person, he'd have gone, oh, that's funny, that's funny. Because I have a report here. He referred to a report on a prison where the inspectors found that prisoners deemed to be at risk to children were being released early. Does this sound like the work of someone making the country more secure? Starmer asked. Oh. And then Sunak said, well, nobody should be put onto this scheme if they're a threat to the public. But he's changing his tune now because he's just replied twice that nobody who was a risk to the public will be on the scheme. Now he's only saying that they shouldn't be on the scheme, not that they won't be. But we know that they are on the scheme. What's more, so do the government, because this is a government watchdog report that Starmer was referring to. He went on. The report shows that domestic abusers are being released early as well. Will Rishi Sunak put a stop to this? And Sunak did not say that he would. In fact, he did not answer the question at all. Proper dodged it. So the situation is that prisoners are being released early because prisons are full. Prisoners who are domestic and child abusers are amongst that number. It's not just that we're saying, hang on, there's nothing in place to stop that happening. We know for a fact that they are already being released early because we've got a report. Sunak was asked to at least stop this practice, but he has refused to do so, which means that he intends to carry on with it. Child and domestic abusers will continue to go free early, without the usual parole procedures, without being sure that they're not a risk to the public. Party of law and order, and Sunak simply does not see the potential danger of letting Labour run away with this. And Starmer had no problem spelling it out really simply for Sunak. He said that the only answer to the question of should domestic abusers be stopped from being released early is yes. He said that Sunak should be stopping domestic abusers being released early, not acting like a jumped up milk monitor and snatching lanyards. Now, I am going to say the Tories should be taking this very seriously. If the Conservatives cannot hold the law and order ground, they've basically got nothing. They've already lost the economy. Now, don't get me wrong. They're always bad at law and order, but the public perception is that they are good. The Tories are pretty good at conning the public about some things. If Labour get cut through with this, the Tories have got nothing left. Banging on about tougher sentences and stop and search, none of this matters if the public do not believe you have the capacity to do it. And Starmer, being a former prosecutor, will always be in his element when talking about this. You know, politicians often have to seem expert in areas in which they're not at all. But Starmer is, of course, an expert in the criminal justice system. He will have Sunak for breakfast in any election debate where Sunak has not prepared the ground in advance. That Sunak could not give that stunningly obvious answer today suggests that his government are not even attempting to attend to the basics ahead of an election which is coming faster than they seem to realise. As for Stephen Flynn of the SNP, he took umbrage at Sunak describing those in favour of Scottish independence as extremists on Monday, something I discussed earlier this week myself. Sunak tried to deny that he'd said it, but this is a bit like Ben Habib. It's like, we've got the tapes, mate. You were recorded saying it. Flynn pointed out that Sunak actively compared half of Scots to Putin. He said, you know, the Prime Minister represents the Scottish people on the world stage. Is this how he wants to be remembered? And Sunak's response was simply to say, oh, the SNP, you're all obsessed with independence, you know, you're obsessed. I mean, maybe someone needs to point out to him it is sort of their main reason for being. Although I will also point this out. So, yeah, the SNP prioritise independence. It's why they exist. I'm sorry that no one appears to have pointed this out to Rishi Sunak. But their new leader, John Swinney, has said that the party needs to focus on domestic issues in election year. So they're capable of putting that to one side while they focus on what they need to focus on for the election. Now, compare that with the Conservatives and their obsession with Brexit. Are the Tories leaving their ideological plaything to one side to focus on domestic issues? No. So which party is really, in the strictest sense of the term, actually obsessed? And as for saying that the SNP's main purpose is to threaten the unity of the UK, Sunak said that, it's like, yes. But it has to be said, the Conservatives have been way more successful at doing that as well, haven't they? So no defection, but another PMQs which shows us that Sunak will be utterly incapable of holding his own in a TV debate when the election is called. In fact, Sunak's actually said he wants to take part in lots of debates with Starmer, specifically with Starmer. I would say he'd be better off in debates with all the leaders, because at least that way some will be attacking Starmer as well. In a direct head-to-head between just those two, Sunak could be obliterated. Imagine PMQs, but where instead of just a few tens of thousands of people watching, it's a third of all voters, because that's how many were watching the TV debates in 2019. A third of everyone who ended up voting was watching them. The last lines of Starmer's in today's session were potentially devastating. They will be if they're heard by more voters. What do you think?
He's literally letting criminals out early. Mr. Speaker, the only answer to the question I asked, whether domestic abusers should be exempt from his early release scheme from anyone serious about security, is yes. Perhaps the most ludicrous part of the Prime Minister's speech on Monday was when he said he won't accept the idea that any of the problems people are facing are caused by the 14 years of Conservative government. He won't say how many prisoners they've released early. He won't say if they're burglars, abusers or stalkers. He won't say where they are or what support their victims are getting. Yet he thinks he has the right to tell people they can't blame his government for any of it. Doesn't he think that rather than confiscating lanyards like some jumped-up milk monitor, he should stop issuing get-out-of-jail cards free to prisoners considered a risk to children?
But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.